So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Kemp Peterson, and on behalf of Women of the World Endowment, I would like to warmly welcome you and thank you so much for joining us today for WoWE's Changemaker event. And we're delighted to have Jessica Robinson, author of Financial Feminism, A Woman's Guide to Investing in a Sustainable Future, here in conversation with our very own Patience Marine Ball, founder and CEO of WoWE. Jessica's going to open up today and talk with us about why this book needed to be written, why it matters for women, and what role the book plays as we face global challenges like the climate crisis and inequality. After the conversation between Jessica and Ruth, we would love to have all of you join in the conversation with your own experiences and perspectives. So when you do so, if you could just briefly introduce yourself and tell us who you are. Just in terms of housekeeping, we're going to record the first half with Patience and Jessica. And then when we open it up to the general conversation, we'll disable the recording. Without further delay, I'd like to now hand it over to Patience to get us started. Patience?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am talking to myself. Am I? No, I am not on mute anymore. It is such a joy for me to be here with everyone in the room, but especially because I'm also in the room with a friend of mine, Jessica. So Jessica, welcome, and welcome to everyone. For friends who are joining us for the first time, WoWE is a product of both frustration and also a view of the big opportunity that mainstream capital seems to have a blind spot around. And this is the opportunity to invest in and through women as solution builders. So we are the first 100% mission-aligned endowment investing in women. We build pathways to mainstreaming investing in and through women as change makers who are driving resilient and sustainable investment systems and economies. We invite co-investing from other investors to expand the capital pool. And then with our income, we grant our returns into entities accelerating the opportunity of women addressing today's most pressing challenges. So what we're creating is this virtuous cycle of capital and also impact that spans the entire investment spectrum and maximizes positive outcomes for all. So Jess and I met a few years back, and this was because a friend, a common friend, thought that we must meet. Jessica had just started an entity called Moxie Futures, and I was laying the foundation for Women of the World Endowment. Jessica went on to, with a wonderful generosity, went on to help me on a pro bono basis to develop the initial communication strategy for WoWE, as well as the website design. And so Jessica, I'm forever grateful. And then a few months later, you, or maybe fairly early on, you started talking about the fact that you're going to be writing this book, which would be at the intersection of women and sustainable investing. And I thought, wow, it's just more of what we have the ambition to influence. And so I was able, thank you very much for the invitation, to contribute to the book. So for those who have received it or who have purchased it, if you go to page 224, and I'm not suggesting that you skip all the other pages, I'm just saying when you get to page 224, you will notice that WoWE is actually, the story of WoWE is actually in there as well. So Jess, without further delay, can you describe for everyone else what motivated you to write this book? What was the genesis, and what impact do you hope and want it to have?
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And of course, Patience, thank you for your contribution and your support for the book. So it's a bit of, it's a personal story somewhat in terms of what motivated me. Well, I suppose everything's a personal story, right? I start from the premise that the sooner we transform our world into a global matriarchy, the better, you know? And in a way, I say that partly with tongue in cheek, but you know, there's a huge part of me that actually believes that, and with that wholesale transformation, with women sitting at the core of every decision, whether it be political, economic, societal, or whatever. I honestly believe that the more that we have women in those decision-making roles, the kinder and the fairer and the happier our world will become. And I think, interestingly, the COVID pandemic has actually demonstrated that. I'm pretty sure all of us, when we see, the latest article that comes out and says the countries that have managed the COVID better are led by women, we're all like, yes, we've been saying this for years, And so I guess for me, my book really was starting from the premise of how we can elevate women to be able to make so many more decisions than they currently do, the better. And what I've done is taken something that I do in my day job and translated into what I know and what I do. Is sort of my small contribution to that journey. So I'm an ESG, a sustainable finance expert. So I've worked a lot with governments, institutional investors. I was previously head of Asia for the United Nations, supported Principles for Responsible Investment. I've worked all over the world, largely with regulators and governments on sustainable investing and ESG. And through that, I really started to develop this fascination with the topic of women as individual investors, sort of really thinking about their motivation, their thinking, and how it relates to sustainable investing and to impact. And this is what led me to set up Moxie Future, which is essentially, it's a blog and community platform. It's focused on educating women as individual investors on sustainable investing. And it was really born out of this instinct that women have this almost inherent motivation to think about the impact of their financial and investment decisions. And actually, a lot of that was anecdotal. So I would speak very often at conferences to, mainstream financial audiences, governments, and so forth. And I was always struck by the number of professional women who would come up to me after the event and say, what you spoke about was so fascinating and so important. And so I started to research and say, okay, what are the investment trends behind women and where they put their money? And whilst there wasn't a lot of evidence out there, there was clear enough data that said there's something in it. There's something intrinsic that women tend to think about when making an investment decision. So that's when I set up Moxie Future, and we got so much interest. People reaching out all the time and saying, this is really important. How do I do it? What do I do next? Who do I speak to? How do I engage with a financial advisor? And that's when I decided to really put it into a book. And the book is very much a easy read, accessible. I was just joking with you, Patience, before that some of my friends who've read it, I've written it very much as though I'm having a conversation with a friend, with a girlfriend. And some of my friends say, I can literally imagine you speaking it into my ear, talking this to me. And really, that's what it's all about. It's almost as though the sisterhood is sitting down and having a conversation and saying, okay, look, this is my pension, or this is some money that I want to invest in a fund. How do I do it? Where do I go? What do I care about? And through the book, the idea is that it's a practical guide, but at the same time, it's also a huge call to action. It's really, how can we inspire a movement? It's like WoWE, right? It's how can we fundamentally transform the way we think, not accepting the status quo, but actually saying, look, we can do something different with our money. And that actually sort of relates to the activist in me, I think. Having worked in financial services, or the financial services industry for all of my career, I'm just so frustrated by the lack of progress. I feel that our financial markets, the way we allocate capital, the way we ascertain risk, I think is so fundamentally flawed. And as having committed so many years to the sustainable finance dialogue, I'm just frustrated that we're still where we are. And that relates to gender, it relates to climate change, it relates to inequality, it relates to education. And that's where I'm trying to figure out what are the levers of change that I can access, and where can I motivate, and what can I do? And that really was the whole essence of the book, putting something into one place that I can then disseminate and call on other women and say, look, this is important. Let's have a conversation around this. And I should add, actually, I mean, the book itself is intended as a very global communication. I mean, being a Brit, you know, I'm sitting now, I live in the Middle East now, but I've spent many of my years in Asia. I used to live in New York. I'm from London, you know, so I've lived all over the world. And the commonality that I see is that women genuinely care about impact and creating some kind of positive environmental or societal impact in everything they do. And that means not just as consumers, it means as investors. So that's really where it all came from.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. And I just want to pull on one of the strings that you talked about, this thesis that there's evidence out there that says women consider environmental and social impact in their investment decisions. And as we now know that women are acquiring more and more wealth in different forms, in, you know, both from the income that they're making, from inherited wealth, from all kinds of other, from companies that they have founded that are actually succeeding. Tell us a little bit more about this, whether we should be hopeful that as women come into this wealth, they are going to be spending it and investing it in the way that, you know, you've researched, that we care about sustainability. So how is the acquisition of wealth already being translated, or is it being translated into action in the investing world?
So with all optimism, I think the motivation is there, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but I do think we're at that point where we need to move that motivation to action. And some of that, so the book is called Financial Feminism, and my real crux of the argument is, whilst financial feminism obviously is everything to do with financial equality of women, that is incredibly important. Yes, it is incredibly important. The harsh reality is we continue to face huge inequalities when it comes to money. You know, there's the gender pay gap, which I think we know this year, when the next lot of data comes out, it's not going to be a pretty story at all. But there's all these other, you know, gaps. There's the investing gaps. So women have this massive shortfall when they come to retire. There are debt gaps. There are certain types of debt that women pay more for than men. There's the funding gap, which we all know. I'm pretty sure everyone on this call is just astounded year after year that we come out with these figures on VC funding and how much is going to women. So all of those financial gaps really justify a discussion around financial feminism. However, my argument and the very crux of the book is, I think we're missing an opportunity if we don't take that concept one step further. And it's not just about women earning and investing on a par with men. It's actually about empowering women to use that money as investors to really build the kind of world they want to live in. And that's the crux. That's the commonality with sustainable investing. You know, it's about using our wealth, aligning our investment choices with our values. And I think that's the argument that I'm just trying to make sure we're having, that we don't just talk about closing the investing gap, we're talking about actually using money in a different way. And that's the transformational piece as well. Now, yes, Patience, as you said, women are obviously owning a significant tranche of the world's private wealth. And this is obviously set to grow. We're economic powerhouses, right? But the research is also telling us about this imperative on societal environmental impact. And there's a lot of data out there. We did it actually, so Moxie Future, we did a piece of research across different countries. So we covered the US, China, Australia, the UK, and Germany. And we interviewed women in all of those 5 countries. And the data that came out was very clear across all of those women in all of those countries. 83% of women surveyed indicated that they genuinely care about where their money is invested. 69% of women feel a sense of urgency to invest responsibly, and 63% of women say that they want to do this today. We are challenged in how we do it, but I think we can come to that later. But the point is, we know at this moment in time, this genuinely matters to women. That women, yes, they need to invest more, but they also want to invest more consciously. And that's where we come in with financial feminism. This whole concept of investing according to values. And I think that for WoWE, it's obviously something that's quite integral to the work you're doing as well, right? The value framework that we now want to sit around capital allocation.
Absolutely, Jess, you're right. It is the thesis essentially of WoW as well, that at the end of the day, the world is seeing an accelerated amount of challenges, pandemics, climate crisis, inequity, general inequity. And what has not been tried before is centralizing women in the problem solving. I think for most entities out there, and entities that actually really mean well, foundations to asset owners who mean well, the problem is that folks generally think about women at the end of the value chain of problem solving. They think about women as the victims and the beneficiaries of the work that they're doing upstream. And what we want to invest into, that we're already investing into at WoWE, that we want to influence others to invest into, is the idea of women as change makers. So thinking about women in the entire value chain of problem solving. And to your point, women are actually wired that way. And so, another data point that I would just like to add to yours is that compared to male counterparts, female financial advisors are 42% more likely to be interested in recommending investments that provide both social returns, environmental returns, as well as financial returns. And so women are, when we don't have capital to invest ourselves, and not everybody has capital to invest themselves, even when we are influencing others to invest, we have this double lens that money should do more than just have deliver financial returns. But the other really interesting thing about it is that even when we are thinking about sustainability and investing for environmental and social returns as well, that does not actually cause any limitation to financial returns. Overall, you actually end up with better returns. So companies, for instance, that have above average gender diversity in their ranks end up with revenues that are greater, with better risk management, downside risk management. So, having women as central to problem solving, as central to the value chain of action, is both environmentally a plus, and in terms of financial returns, also a plus. And it's just a matter of the world beginning to see this and mainstreaming this at scale.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, that thing around women in leadership management positions. There was some interesting research around the number of women in senior management positions compared with the number of environmental law cases, legal claims that were made against certain companies. And it was found a direct correlation between more women in senior management positions in companies equated to lower environmental liabilities on those companies, which I just thought was fascinating, in terms of that relationship. I think where the financial feminism piece comes in, and playing to your comments, Patience, around how we enable women as change makers, we have a lot of work to do in the finance and the investment industry. What frustrates me, and again, this is one of the reasons that I felt so motivated to write this book, is that many women feel very patronized by the industry. So, and I'm talking like women also who work in financial services, they may go to a financial advisor, and from the offset, they feel talked down to or disengaged. And that's before they even come across the conversation on ESG and sustainable investing, because a lot of financial advisors are still simply not equipped to have those conversations. And so I think there's a whole bunch, there's a lot of soul searching that we really need to have around how the industry relates to women as customers, as clients. And that's right the way through the spectrum, from students just graduating, right the way through to women who are retiring, high income earners, high net worths, but everyone on the income spectrum. Sustainable investing is not only for the mega rich. It really is right now. It's for everybody. And I think overcoming those structural challenges within the industry are critical. So, there's this, I talk about this quite a lot in my book around how we communicate with women through the media and through advertising around money. And so there's some great research done out of the UK, which did a linguistics study at, they surveyed mainstream media in terms of how they talk about investing to men and women differently. And men are communicated to, it's like, be more of a man, invest, take risks, be strong. Yet women, when we communicate about money, it's save, buy a new handbag, be cautious. The sub message being, you're never going to quite earn enough money, so be careful with your money. And if you think about that and you take that one step back and you think, oh my goodness, we've been bombarded with these messages. So no wonder, some of the stats are really scary. I had written a couple of things down, that something that came out recently. So Merrill Lynch came out and said just over half of the women they surveyed said they had confidence about investing, but yet almost 70% of men said they strongly feel they have confidence over investing. Well, of course, that's going to be the case if we're telling women that they have to be careful with their money, and we're telling men, take a risk, be a man, And I just think some of these are conversations that we need to have. We're sort of compounding the problem about women having not as much confidence as men when it comes to investing, but then also the communication and the language we use around that. And I think those are really critical questions. And they're hard to answer without some wholesale transformation. And if it was down to me, we'd start again with the capital markets, right?
Well, I wonder, I think that there's an opportunity coming out of 2020, when the world we've all lived the same reality, right? I wonder if we actually do not have that opportunity to remake capital markets, right? To really, because women through 2020 have shown this incredible exemplary leadership, right? Across all levels, from the frontline workers, the nurses, 70% of the world's nurses are female, to the teaching staff, to the folks who engineered, the CRISPR technology that allowed the fast tracking of vaccine production. All of these things. There is this visual of women as being powerful. And to your point earlier on about countries led by women having had an edge in solving the the pandemic, or in addressing and managing through the pandemic. And so if you think about this, do we not have a moment right now to actually remake capital markets, or to at least for all of us, figure out what our part is in remaking, capital markets? And so, let's take climate change, for instance. Let's just talk about that. That's a big problem. And you have used in your book, which, as you said, is incredibly accessible, about what sort of investing can be done to address the climate crisis today. And then we can talk about the other types of crisis as well, but climate.
Yeah, and I think, I'm an environmental economist, so climate is my big sort of passion. And I think, there's so much we could say on it, sort of, and particularly the intersect with climate and women, right? We know that women are disproportionately affected by climate change, and that thankfully we're now having that conversation, but we've been flying that flag for a while, and it's taken some time for the data to now come out and say, look, the women, it's women actually across most societies that actually affected the most. But at the same time, women are actually the ones finding the solutions, whether it be on a very small scale through to a much larger scale. And I say this quite anecdotally as well, in that someone who's been in sustainable finance in the sort of institutional world for so long, I am astounded at how many female leaders there are in sustainable finance. If you look across the broader finance world, you've got a higher proportion of women in sustainable finance, right? So I think the key question then is, as investors, on the one hand, how do we alleviate the situation for many women who are not in a position to? And then two, how do we support the women as founders of businesses, whatever, in terms of the climate solutions, and then move that capital at scale. And now that needs to happen across all asset classes. And obviously the solutions, I think, are similar to solutions that we may see to broader problems, right? So from an investor perspective, we need to educate women on the climate risks that we face. So we know that there's no market, no financial institution that will be immune from the effects of climate change. So we need to have that educated discussion around what this means for your investment portfolio. And then actually highlighting the opportunities that we see between investment and low carbon transition. So I included a section in the book specifically on climate, because I'm not sure we're having that enough targeted as women as investors. I still think that we're not sort of joining the dots there. So I think that's a missed opportunity. We also need to focus on product availability, quite simply. How can we get more investment products to the retail market to support women in actually investing in the low carbon clean tech transition? And that means accessibility of investment products, and it means transparency and accountability. One of the biggest worries for me, and I say this, having been sort of dedicated my career to this, what I see a lot of going on now is greenwashing. And this really, really worries me. I think, not to name names, but we see some of those huge asset managers out there writing their annual letters and saying we're only going to be doing ESG, but we all know who's been funding fossil fuels, right? And so for the retail market, we need to be more transparent. So just signing, investing in a clean tech ETF, is that enough? I don't think it is. I think we need to be more educated and more targeted. And then on top of that, and again, I think maybe you've got some comments from WoWE, but this intersection between climate and gender, what products can we develop that really empower women as investors to support that gender solution to climate change? Yeah. And I certainly haven't seen a lot of that on the market yet. I don't know, Patience, if you've observed anything.
Yeah, no. So this point about not just encouraging women to use their capital, actually, I would say encouraging the entire market. So we're encouraging women to use their capital in a certain way. We're encouraging the rest of the market to leverage the opportunity that is female, because women have, to your point, are built to have certain sensibilities. There's certain sensibilities that we hold dear that would transform how capital is being allocated. So there is that. But this idea of being involved in the development of actual strategies, investment strategies and investable products, I think it's a key place for women to actually play a role. So instead of waiting for products to be developed for us, and having ultimately products that may not actually meet what our view of green is, so we have greenwashed products instead of truly green products, or what our view of just products, equitable products, if you're talking about, the racial crisis here in the US, or if you're talking about the pandemic and solutions that are coming up, whether it's, solutions to the care economy, solutions, whatever it is, the issue you're talking about, being in the room when products are being created, when strategies are being developed is really critical. And this is part of what we're trying to do at WoWE. We are not only investing with, a lens, so fossil-free, deforestation-free, and all kinds of other screens. We actually do the work of being involved with organizations that are doing that, great work of embracing complexity, developing KPIs, so that we actually understand when we use a screen, we know what's actually behind the screen, right?
Yeah.
And so we are investing into that in terms of time, as well as a little bit of the capital that we have. So our grant making is essentially focused exactly on those types of interventions, where we can put a little bit of our capital towards development of those tools.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you say that, because one of the things that I really want to advocate for as well, and I talk about in the book, is how can we get more women into the finance and investment industry? Because the more we have women designing those financial products, the more we're going to develop products that are aligned with what women are looking for as the client, as the investor. And I think, I think it's really interesting, because the issue, the sort of fundamental issue with the industry is that everything's seen through a male lens, right? Capital allocation, risk, product design, it's all been seen through a male lens with a sort of male default position. And I think that the point that you made earlier is now the opportunity to rethink our capital markets. I think it is, and I wish we could. My concern is that the decision making is still within an existing power structure that we still haven't really figured out how to overcome. And that's the concept behind financial feminism, is almost, okay, let that happen. But the fact is, women now own, 30% of the world's wealth. Let's do something differently. It does not all have to be done within the status quo of what exists. We can do something differently. And that's the call to action piece, which I think is the alignment with WoWE in terms of, all right, we don't have to sit back and say, this is the way it needs to be done. There are alternative routes, and there are alternative ways to use our capital. The other thing I think that's quite scary is where you've seen some of the asset managers sort of wake up and go, okay, our female client base is actually quite important. They've kind of, they've done the pink wash. It's like, can we repackage it in pink? I don't know if anyone's seen, I wish I had it with me. There was an advert that, I don't know, it's Fidelity or something. Vanguard, I can't even remember. And it's a woman standing on a rock and I kid you not, she's in a ball gown, looking very powerful in a ball gown. And I just thought, is that the best you can do, right? And I feel that's what we're coming up against. And so we need to sort of push past that and really actually, as you said, almost design our own products that are impactful and address what we're talking about.
Yeah. And I do think in addition to being in the rooms as products are being designed, strategies are being designed, and in addition to using our own financial power to make certain investments, there's also an opportunity, and this is where, as we build, and people have asked us, why an ambitious goal of building a $5 billion endowment over the next 5 years? I think that there's also an opportunity to be inside the rooms with other institutional capital holders. And instead of trying to convince them of how we see the world, both from a values perspective in terms of financial return and a value perspective, financial returns, and values perspective in terms of long-term sustainability of people and planet, if we can be inside those rooms. And the invitation to get inside those rooms, unfortunately, comes with having enough capital. You have to, be, of an asset, of an AUM of a certain size yourself to be invited into those rooms. And that's part of the ambition, right? That all options should be on the table. Women investing their capital in a certain way, being inside the rooms and influencing others, being part of strategies and product development. So just, if we could just, before we call on everybody else to come in, sorry, and I I have no idea why we still have a landline, but it has this way of ringing at the wrong time, and I meant to unplug it. Anyway, as I was saying that before we invite everybody else to join us in this conversation, I just want to ask you, given 2020, what should be our burning platform, right? And I think we started talking about it, but if you had to just put it in simple ways for others, what is that burning platform for you? For us, it's this idea of women as change makers, as drivers of solutions. And in your book, you've named a few things, but if you had to crystallize it to a single burning platform, what would that be?
Even that sounds like a simple question. It's very hard to answer, isn't it? So I believe, and I think it's a deep philosophical conversation that we as women and as capital allocators, as wealth owners, it's around the purpose of capital, right? And it's around money as a social construct to create a world. It's not an end in itself. And I think so. For me, that burning platform is to support women to have that conversation and genuinely ask themselves, when I make an investment, if I invest in a sector or a company, what is it that I'm doing it for? Right? We're not saying it's not philanthropic, it's not charitable. We're saying, yeah, you still have an investment portfolio, but what is it that you want to gain from that? What's the future look like for you? And I think that philosophical discussion around the purpose of capital is so critical, because I do genuinely believe it's something that it's a conversation that many women want to have, but it's not something you're going to go and have with your financial advisor, right? I think most of us have tried and tested that, and we get told, oh, be quiet, here's where you're going to make your most money. Well, hang on, maybe that's not what we all want to do. Maybe there's a deeper, more philosophical conversation that we need to have. And so that for me is the purpose of the book. And it's really how we can support women and empower women to feel that's something that they can believe in. Yeah, so that's where I probably land on that.
Thank you very much. And I'm in total agreement that it is the purpose of capital. And I think as purposeful beings, I think we as women have to truly embrace this opportunity to be the bridge between mainstream capital and how it is being allocated today, and the allocation of capital into the future that we want to see. And the visual of 2020 is just such a strong visual for us all. And now maybe at this point, I can just invite others, folks on this in this room with us, to just come in and help us, express what they believe is the burning platform. What is that world that they imagine if capital were to become more purposeful? And then to just ask you questions, if they've read bits in your book, to ask you questions around specific areas that they would like to understand a little bit more. So with that, I'd just like to invite everyone to join us.